In this psychology, we are asked to begin to be mindful of or pay attention and study fear or anger or grasping or loss or hurt or embarrassment or the things that entangle us. And as we practice mindfulness and awareness, noticing grasping and resistance to states that create more pain or difficulty, just seeing how they are, we can also discover a third key route to unhappiness or unwise kind of relation to experience. And that is more difficult to see than these first two and kind of underlies them. It's the moments when there's an absence of mindfulness. So it's called delusion, what Einstein called an optical delusion of consciousness that takes us to be separate somehow. And the state of delusion in this psychology is not seeing or not knowing how things are and not remembering who we are, what is our true nature. Who are you really as you go through your days? Poem from Rumi. You've lost your camel, my friend, and everyone's giving you advice. You don't know where your camel is, but you do know that these casual directions are wrong. So there's this world, and we're seeking something. In this psychology, again, remember, when that grasping is predominant, you enter the room, that type, and you see what you like and what you want more of and what's beautiful and what you want to possess or meet or have. And for the aversion state, when you enter the room, you look around and you see what's wrong with it and you judge it and you find things that you don't like about it. The deluded state on entering a room is simply confused. They don't know what they're doing there, who to speak to, what's going on, or why. Right? And if you examine each moment of experience, there's moments of pleasure which tend to lead to grasping. Oh, I want to grasp that and have more of that. And there's moments of unpleasant experience, and they tend to lead to aversion or anger, pushing away. Each one its reaction, not being free. The one that leads to delusion is the neutral experience. There you are, an experience comes and it's not particularly strongly pleasant or unpleasant. And then what happens is we go on automatic. We go to sleep. Sometimes it's automatic eating. Sometimes it's that automatic driving. You know, where you get there and you remember, oh yeah, half an hour I was driving, where was I? It's dullness, being lost, caught up, superficial. It can get deeper than that. Sometimes it's more active. I remember one morning in the course of therapy, I was working with a therapist in San Francisco, and it had come to a place of dealing with some real grief from my childhood, lots of pain. It was time to go in, and as I got closer and closer to San Francisco, I got sleepier and sleepier. I got to the Golden Gate Bridge, I could barely hold my eyes open. I just wanted to turn around, pull off the road and take a nap. It was like Oz, you know, in the poppy fields. Poppies, what did she say, the witch, right? Nice poppies, put them to sleep. So it's delusion. Automatic, getting lost. And as we pay attention, we can see the frequency of that particular state. The sense impressions come, pleasant, neutral, unpleasant, and we don't recognize what's here. We're on automatic. And the society colludes. They speak of the art of war, says Denise Levertov. But the arts draw their light from the soul's well, and warfare dries up the soul and draws its power from a dark and burning wasteland. When Leonardo set his genius to devising machines of destruction, he was not acting in the service of art. He was suspending the life of art over an abyss, as if one were to hold a living child out of an airplane window at 30,000 feet. Delusion. We live in a culture of denial and delusion a lot. Delusion about war. delusion about romance, which started long ago from the troubadours, Tristan and Isolde and all of that, and the great ideal love that you will find that is, you know, the same thing that 2 months later then you're separating or you get divorced or something, and happens over and over again when it's that idealistic. The ecological denial of the fact that deforestation, soil erosion, species loss, so forth, it hasn't stopped. It's continuing. I mean, we know about it, but all right, now we know about it and it continues. So does that mean we really know about it? Again, from Denise Levertov, remember Archbishop Oscar Romero in El Salvador. He spoke Sunday by Sunday, a radio broadcast of the clamor of the people, the aching of so much crime, the ignominy of so much violence, calling for justice. And each week he read from El Salvador on the air the roll of names of the newly dead and disappeared, men, women, and children, tortured, killed, abducted. Antonio Flores, Sandra Martinez, Boris Napoleon Martinez, Raul Rosales, Edwin Chavez, Marco Antonio Doña, Aristides Castillo, Claudia Inés Coto, Juan Rodriguez, Adolfo Mejia. He would just read the list of names like that every week on the air. Imagine that. And then, of course, what happened was that he was shot and silenced. Sometimes it's very personal. Sometimes it's political. Sometimes it's personal, like the woman who came up to me and spoke of her sorrow because her father had died recently and how she had learned. She came from an alcoholic family where they never talked much. And she said she'd wanted to know her father was sick. And her mother called her one evening and said, your father died last night, late in the night, in the morning. She said, well, why didn't you call me? She said, I wanted to wait until the rates went down. This is a true story. In the New Yorker magazine, they have an ad for a perfume called Samsara, you know. Samsara means the cycle of delusion from one moment to another. So to awaken in this psychology is to step outside of denial, to feel with a kind of nakedness and vulnerability that is our true state. Albert Camus wrote about fear. He said, what gives travel its value is fear. At a certain moment, when we're far from our own country, we become seized by an instinctive desire to go back to the protection of old habits and ways. At that moment, we are feverish, but also porous, so that the slightest touch makes us quiver to the depths of our being. Another way to put it is that delusion is not accepting or seeing and noticing the first noble truth of the Buddha, that the world is a compost pile out of which grow flowers and mushrooms and tomatoes and beautiful things and children, and back into which go every one of our bodies and everyone we know, and that there's beauty and joy and suffering and pain, and they are inextricably linked, birth and death. Not seeing the pains of youth, the pains of adolescence, the pains of middle age, and the pains of old age. That's what delusion is. Not seeing the suffering of poverty, and not seeing the suffering of riches. Not seeing the nature of the earth plane that we're born into. So it says in the Bhagavad Gita, what's the most amazing thing? Krishna speaking with Arjuna. The most amazing thing on this earth, Arjuna says, is that people can see others all around them die and somehow still think it won't happen to me. And we're trained not to look. Corpses aren't really around the way they are in India very much, and we're trained not to look at life. We're trained, as Alice Miller says, not only you shouldn't say or feel something, but you didn't even see it. You didn't feel it. Remember this poem? She climbs easily onto the box called Ordinary Heartbreak that seats her above the swivel chair at adult height, crosses her legs, left ankle over right, smooths the plastic apron over her lap, while the beautician lifts her ponytail and mocks, "This is coarse as a horse's tail." And then, as if that's all there is to say, the woman at once whacks off and tosses its foot and a half into the trash. And the little girl who didn't want her hair cut, but long ago learned successfully how not to say what it is she wants, who even at this minute cannot quite grasp her shock and grief, is getting her hair cut. For convenience, her mother put it. The long waves gone that had been evidence at night when loosened from their clasp, she might secretly be a princess. Rather than cry out, she grips her own wrist and looks to her mother in the mirror, but her mother is too polite or too reserved, too indifferent to defend the girl. So the girl herself takes up indifference, while the pain follows a hidden channel to a place almost unknown in her. Convinced as she is that her own emotions are not the ones her life depends on. She shifts her gaze from the mother's face back to the haircut now, so steadily, as if this short-haired child she sees were someone else. Not only you shouldn't feel or see, you didn't feel. That's delusion. The basis of wisdom and compassion, authentic wisdom and compassion of the heart, is to see the truth and tell the truth and rest in the truth. What is true that we are in delusion about? What don't we want to see about our bodies that's true? What beliefs in our mind do we carry based on denial? What is true on our earth, our society, that our heart needs to remember to live wisely? To meditate, to sit, is to see and feel honestly and bring a respect, as if you could bow to what is, however horrible and beautiful it presents itself. To meditate is to discover the heart's capacity for truth in the midst of sorrows and the midst of beauty. You've lost your camel, my friend, and it's here to be found. So in Buddhist psychology, this quality of delusion comes in, and it speaks to a kind of mistake about happiness. The mistake is that we believe that possession of a certain form or thing will be lasting or satisfying. Possessing our children, our money, our home, or something, that will do it. That possession will ever really make our heart happy. That it will ever last. I thought I wanted that. Now I thought I wanted that. That's a mistake. And it brings unhappiness rather than freedom. Delusion also makes the mistake of permanence. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi summed up all of Buddhist teachings in 3 words. Not always so. Not always so. Could we really see that and believe that? Praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, the worldly winds that change. Anyone who is not experiencing that change. Not always so. So it's a delusion to think anything lasts, anything at all. Delusion, the mistake about ourself. That somehow in this world where everything changes and nothing can be possessed, that at least we can possess ourselves. Grasping, protecting, enhancing. When you pay attention honestly in Buddhist psychology, the very task of it is to take apart this false sense of self that we live from, this body of fear. The past doesn't exist. It's just a thought in your mind right now. The future doesn't exist. It's another thought in your mind right now. There's just this present moment. The self doesn't exist. You can grasp and say, this body or this thought, this changing experience in this moment is me, and then it's gone. When you study Buddhist psychology, you study the nature of yourself. And the more deeply and carefully we pay attention, we begin to see that permanence, graspability, solidity, all of that is a fiction. Traditionally, the images that are used are of a magician who casts an enchantment so that that coil of rope looks like a snake. Or like a mirage in the desert where you look out and it sure looks like water out there. Or clouds that you lay back and look up and there's animal shapes and mountains, but they're just clouds. Or a sleeping potion made from the worm apple tree that brings all kinds of visions for a time. Or an echo or a reflection in the mirror, insubstantial. Now this sounds like poetry, doesn't it? It's true. Don Juan, I remember in the writings of Castaneda at one point, Castaneda was talking about how much trouble it was and all these things he was going through and what was the point of it all. And Don Juan looked at him and said, I could tell you. He said, I could tell you right now, but you wouldn't believe it. So you have to go through all of this. Simple. You don't exist in the way that you think at all. It's just not true. So many illusions we live in, and the deepest is that sense of ourself as separate. Illusions. One day, Sister Josephine was traveling and arrived at Denver Stapleton Airport. She had several hours between planes and did some of her writing, and then decided to take a break. So she looked around to find someone trustworthy to take care of her belongings while she took a walk. There were two men nearby who didn't speak. The younger one seemed pleasant and relaxed. He was dressed casually in slacks and a sports shirt. The other, dressed in a suit looking like a businessman, was quite stern. He didn't smile and paid no attention to anyone, including the man next to him. He struck her as kind of dour. So she asked the younger fellow to watch her things, which he readily agreed to do. She spent about a half an hour wandering about the airport and returned, thanked him, and went back to her writing. Sometime later, a policeman in uniform approached the two men, and they stood up. Only then did she realize that they were handcuffed together, and that the man who had guarded her belongings was the one in custody. As he was being led away, he told her with a pleasant smile that he was being taken in for breaking and entering. I don't know. We are in a society that's now spending more on prisons and criminal justice than on our educational system. We have the largest prison population of any industrialized country. It used to be only South Africa was higher than us, but not anymore. So what does that say? And what's real in this? And then you look at the cultural and racial mix of the prison systems, and it's even worse. I mean, it's the same thing as South Africa. So we think things are one way for a moment, and then in a moment our opinions change. Who is the criminal? In a moment we can see it differently again. Ajahn Chah, my teacher, I remember someone asking him, could he explain delusion? And he said, you're asking where the horse is and you're riding on it. So this deepest delusion is a misidentity. Alan Watts called it the taboo against knowing who you are. We put our attention on the wrong things. What we get or make or have, our self-image, enhance our personality, our body, our things. But who is that all for? Who does it happen to? Can we begin to sense, as the Buddhist practice of mindfulness suggests, this moment, what is true? Sight, sound, smell, taste, perceptions of body and mind. Love, longing, fear, jealousy, desire, happiness, arise and pass. And as we sense that, can we see that it's not separate, that we don't possess it? You just have to close your eyes for a moment in meditation. If you feel deeply, the sense of your body starts to open. There is pressure and hot and cold, but there aren't any clear boundaries. And how about your mind? What's inside? And am I outside your mind? Ha! And if I'm inside, you're in more trouble, right? Every breath we take, there's a 99% chance that it contains one molecule from Julius Caesar's dying breath. That's how interconnected we are. The retina of our eyes, 100 million cells, rods and cones, remember that from school? Responding to the light of the sun, which gets filtered into, this is sunlight too, only it's sunlight making trees in the Carboniferous era or whatever, which then became oil that was burned in the power plants to produce more sunlight, more or less. It's the same source of energy. And where did that come? It all came from the Big Bang, or the original flash, or whatever you want to call it. And that's what we see in this moment. We see the reflections of that which happened. The more deeply we pay attention, the more deeply we experience that we do not exist separate from the sunlight or the clouds or the earthworms. That this body we have is only our food body. That's what it's made of, right? It's food. Is that you? Are you food? Is this us? We were a child, was that us? We're not the same as an adult or an old person. I met a friend who I hadn't seen in some years who's in his 80s. And he came up and he hugged me and he seemed so much smaller. And he said, yes, I shrunk 6 inches since I last saw you. It's amazing, becoming this tiny, wizened person. To the extent that we have learned to grasp and identify with this limited life, we suffer. It's that simple. The amount of our identification with it is our delusion and our suffering. But the grasp is so strong. I remember when my teacher Ajahn Chah was coming out of the hospital. He'd been in the hospital for a long time, gravely ill, and he got better for a while. And I went to see him, and at some point I said, well, you were always teaching about birth leading to aging, leading to sickness and death. That's part of the Buddhist teachings. I said, you always used to talk about that. And he looked at me and he said, don't say that so lightly. You know, he was just out of months of the hospital. The grasping is so strong. It's not a small thing. I've been on retreat this past week and this week ahead as well, and I decided to come out of my retreat just spending 12 days sitting and walking in silence. And as I've been sitting, the first few days are just the layers of things opening. Layers and layers. thoughts and memories and fears and pain in my body and energy and grasping and hopes and desires and all of this stuff, and I just sit and kind of let the layers open. Those of you who've done retreats, they're wonderful experiences, and terrible ones, painful ones. Know what the beginning is like. All the stuff that you take to be yourself. Oh, that, and I care about that, and I don't like that. And you could feel all that just kind of opening. And then gradually it starts to quiet down, and the mind gets more spacious, and the heart softens and opens. And there's enough space to ask this question, this fundamental question: to whom is all this refer? Who gets the mail, right? Who is this happening to? And in silence, in surrender, in that deep attention, I remembered my teacher, one teacher in India said, "Can you prove to me that I was born?" He said, "I know this body was born. That is not me. It has nothing to do with me. Can you prove I was born?" And as you sit and pay attention in this psychology, which is really a way of self-understanding, the inherent emptiness of life shows itself. First, the emptiness of self, that we do not possess or own or grasp a single thing. There's a thought and it's gone, and a feeling, I hate that person, I love that person, I want this, I don't want that, and it's gone. Are you your feelings? I hope not. Probably better than being your thoughts, but only a little bit. Your body, it's this way and it's that, and it's pleasant and it's unpleasant and so forth. Is that who you are? You can care for it like a garden, but it becomes clearer and clearer that we possess none of that. This is the emptiness of self. It's not mine or yours. And then a deeper emptiness, which is sometimes called voidness. The mirage, the echo, the rainbow. History. Nation follows nation, tribe follows tribe. Species follows species, like sandcastles. And then in a moment there's a sudden loss. Someone dies. The death of a child or a parent. Or your own, you come very close to death. And all of a sudden, all these things you took to be real, the life seems so real to you, and then you're going to die. And what happens to you and to it? I remember this wonderful old teacher, Jocelyn King. Her husband went to Burma. He was a Buddhist scholar. She went along and didn't have anything to do, so she went to a monastery and meditated and got enlightened while he wrote a couple books. She was great. We went to have lunch with them one day, this old couple who'd been in Burma in the 50s and 60s. He was talking about all the things he'd found in the Buddhist texts and stuff. We were helping her wash the dishes, and she said, "I don't understand why people take a stand on the quicksand of somethingness rather than resting in the firm ground of emptiness." She picked up another dish and started to wash it. The invitation of this process of meditation, of attention, of this psychology, is to the deathless, to nirvana. And it's not a philosophy or a belief that you have or don't have. You're not asked to believe something. It's as direct as the pure, fresh air in the high mountains. You know, when you're way up in the mountains, how clean the air feels? Or as silent as when you go down and diving under the water in the seas in Hawaii or the Caribbean, and there's all those waves and boats, and you go under the water and you realize it's just waves. And you go into the depths of that blue water. It is the eternal present, where there is no past and future, that is your true home. The abode of the Buddha and the abode of all Buddhas who are wise. And in this sense of emptiness, the pregnant void it's sometimes called, there's tremendous happiness and joy to be found. The happiness of non-possession, the strength of Gandhi, In the midst of the misery of Calcutta, the smile of Mother Teresa. The joy of a child playing in the garden. The compassion of a mother for her children. In this space, without possessing, your Buddha nature. What's left in this void if there is nothing to possess? I remember one day, some time ago, I won't say how long, I'd taken magic mushrooms in Boston at a friend's apartment. I was tripping. And I said, let's go outside. So we went out to Boston Common, where I'd been to a number of be-ins and other kinds of events. And I was lying down in Boston Common, and the traffic was going around Boston Gardens and the swan boats and all of this. And I was just lying there in the state that I was in. And I looked up, and there's a beautiful church right by there with this big, tall tower. And at the four corners of the tower, at the very top of the square spire, were four statues of Angel Gabriel with a great horn. And I could hear the music coming out of the horn. I was just lying there grinning and hearing Angel Gabriel play music out over the city of Boston, and the traffic and the trucks were going by. What's left is the mystery of life, that we are alive. It's called the suchness, and Tathagata, the one who rests in the suchness of life. The place of the wise is this eternal moment, to respect and care for what's here, even though it's evanescent, even though it changes, with a compassion and a tenderness for this moment, because this is all that there is, this moment again and again. As in the Tao, nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water, yet for dissolving the hard and inflexible, nothing can surpass it. The soft overcomes the hard, the gentle overcomes the rigid. The master can keep giving because there is no end to her wealth. She acts without expectation, succeeds without taking credit, and doesn't think that she is better or worse than anyone else. Therefore the Master remains serene even in the midst of sorrow. Because she has given up helping, she is people's greatest help from the Tao. What's left? The salmon in the Pacific. 2-3 years, huge wide ocean. They find their own stream, that one stream, and back up to that pool. Nobody knows how. Really, no one does. The turtles that come back to that beach in Chile or Ecuador, wherever it is, put their eggs back, bury them again and again. Amazing things. To sit like a Buddha, not to possess or grasp, not because you shouldn't, but because it doesn't make happiness. And the psychology of the Buddha is really the psychology of liberation of the heart, of joy, of happiness. To sit with your heart open and your eyes open, spacious, participating in the world and free in the midst of it. We are traveling with tremendous speed toward a star in the Milky Way. A great repose is on the earth. My heart's a little fast, otherwise everything's fine. That's a poem from Bertolt Brecht. Can you be with what is just now, this moment? The pain and sorrow, the sensations of the body, the longing, the openness of breath, not wishing a single thing to be different. Can you rest like a Buddha in the suchness of life, with openness and compassion?